Ben, how are you today?
Doing well. How are y'all doing?
Good. Thanks so much for making some time to join us today. First things first, what's the feeling around that Texas A&M program in regards to the mood of Kevin Sumlin? In other words, is he still pretty much a fan favorite, or is the seat continuing to get hotter each year?
I think the latter part is correct. I think the seat does get hotter each year for him. So this is going to be a very pivotal year. I think you're basically seeing exactly what it was like before last season, because no one really knew what it was going to be like when you had Trevor Knight coming in there, and how was he going to be able to adapt, and how were they going to survive with all these JUCO transfers that Kevin Sumlin kind of pieced together. But it ended up working out pretty well considering the circumstances. Granted, they did fall apart in the second half of the season, and that's been their MO the last couple of years for various reasons. But this year it's a little different. You don't have all these guys coming back, and right now A&M's really looking at a rebuilding year, and so that's going to be the real question as to how they do with so many new faces coming in, and a lot of them don't have much experience.
Ben, who's the quarterback this year?
That is a great question. I think right now that is actually one of the things that's keeping spring ball pretty intriguing. Right now, you've got Jake Hubenak, who's filled in over the last couple of years. He started the bowl game when Kyler Murray and Kyle Allen left in 2015, and then last year he played when Trevor Knight was hurt. And so he comes back. He'll be a senior, and he'll be challenged by redshirt freshman Nick Starkel, who was a guy A&M had to go get once they lost both quarterbacks. They got him late in that recruiting cycle, I believe, so that would have been the 2016 class. And then they got freshman Kellen Mond, who's originally from San Antonio, went to IMG Academy. He was kind of the star of that recruiting class, so he's already taken some snaps with the ones. The players have said in the very limited media availability that they've had during spring practice. So we'll see if Kellen can wrestle that starting spot away from Nick Starkel or Jake Hubenak. I think Starkel or Hubenak would be the bets to go. I just don't see a true freshman getting the ball day one, but you never know. This is going to be a really, really pivotal year for someone.
Yeah, and offensively, I think Alabama fans recognize what that receiving core did to them the last few years. Josh Reynolds especially had a good game against Alabama. I was a little surprised to see Ricky Seals-Town go, but they still return Christian Kirk. How do their receivers look this year?
Oh, very young. Right now, you have Christian Kirk coming back. He's going to be a junior, and he's a slot guy. I mean, right now, you really don't know who's going to step in. They lost so many receivers. You talk about, losing Ricky. Then you also lose Speedy Noyle, who never really panned out. Always had off-the-field problems, and he's incredibly athletic. But he would have been a key receiver to have back. They lost him. And so really Christian's the only guy with any real experience coming back. And then Jamon Osborne, another IMG Academy guy, he is going to be a focal point of that receiving core. I think you'll see a lot of experience early, but that's the other thing is whoever ends up being quarterback, it's really unclear who he's going to throw to, because I'm sure the defenses are going to do their best to take away Christian Kirk, who was a really good security blanket for Trevor Knight last year when he needed it.
Obviously, Myles Garrett is projected by many to be the number one overall pick in the NFL draft this year. Is that? Do you think he's a safe pick? I know a lot of SEC fans kind of ragged on him a little bit because he kind of beat up on the Sisters of the Poor, but he had a little bit of injury problem. I know he was still banged up when Alabama played. Those guys, when he's healthy, how good is this guy?
He's incredible when he's healthy, and that's the problem. I mean, that's kind of always been my knock. Kevin Sumlin doesn't talk about injury, so it's kind of really difficult to see how these guys are going. I don't really know if it does the players, a service, in that aspect. I get why he does it, so, it is what it is. But, it's really hard to tell how healthy Myles was throughout the year, and I know he re-aggravated that ankle injury. But keep in mind, I guess, that Tennessee game where A&M and Tennessee were both undefeated, went to overtime, and Myles was playing he could barely walk on that ankle. On the play that ended up sealing the game, the interception in the secondary in overtime, Myles got so much push, even with a bad leg, that it forced Josh Dobbs into a really bad throw. If you go back and watch the tape, that's one of these things. Myles isn't going to get a stat for that play, but he created so much push, even with the bad leg, that it forced a bad throw, and ultimately was a huge win for A&M at the time. When he's healthy, he can go and he can play with the best of them. So I really think the hype, is legit. You kind of see what he did at the beginning of the year last year when he was healthy, and when he got healthier again towards the end of the year, he was just as good as everybody else in the country. And there's a lot of things that really will bode well. Mainly his flexibility, his speed, his athleticism that NFL teams are really loving about him early in the draft.
What's the feeling around John Chavis now that he's been there a few years, gotten his feet underneath him? He's probably the most respected defensive coordinator in the SEC. For 3 separate stops, has had elite defenses. Seems like everywhere he's been. What's the reception like there for him?
It was good after the 2015 season when they made so many strides. 2016 they went really far back, and a lot of the things they talked about in the offseason just didn't pan out. The run defense still wasn't good. They still had some problems, and really the issue is just A&M has no linebackers. That's been the problem. I don't know if it's because of the scheme or just misses in recruiting. I think there's so many things that go into why A&M doesn't have any linebackers, but it really hamstrung Chavis in the fact that you couldn't really blitz anybody as well if you don't apply pressure. And so I think his defense really suffered last year from not having that linebackers, and it had to be a workaround for him. I think A&M has a couple kids this year that they think can play early and play often. And I don't know if that's going to be enough because the corners are coming back and the secondary still isn't kind of where it needs to be, and that was like that for most of last season. And those guys are coming back, and I think they're projected to get starting jobs. So the secondary is still going to be a point of concern. And you've got to remember that A&M's not only losing Myles Garrett, but they're also losing Deshaun Hall. Both of those guys were healthy. A&M didn't need to blitz a lot, but whenever they were off the field, A&M couldn't get any pressure on the quarterback, and that just creates a ton of problems. So I'm very interested to see how Chavis does. Fans I think they might get upset this year if the defense doesn't look as good as it needs to be. And I think generally this is going to be a very difficult year for A&M. But I think it's hard to say that John Chavis isn't a good defensive coordinator when, like you said, he's been to so many different places and he's been able to do well at each stop. I mean, very few coordinators can say that.
Talking to Ben Baby, covers Texas A&M for the Dallas Morning News. It seems like the same old song and dance for Texas A&M every year over the last few years. They get off to an incredibly hot start. People really start buying into the hype, and then November hits and they completely fall apart. What's the story there? Is it just that the schedule maybe gets a little harder, or why do we keep seeing the same song and dance every year?
Oh, that's a good question, and I think and I've only covered them for a year. It's been, I'm relatively new to covering college sports in general, but when you go back and you look at it and you see how it shakes out, it's always, when it comes to SEC play, A&M hasn't been terrific in SEC play, with the exception of that first year. And when you look at it, that really was a Big 12 team that came in to the SEC and really did wonders. You had a really great, they recruited well. Someone was able to get the most out of those guys and max them out. You kind of had that really just terrific year in 2012. Since then, it's just, for whatever reason, and someone's pulled in really good recruiting classes on paper, but it just seems that they haven't really adapted to the SEC yet. And I know a lot of A&M fans probably don't want to hear that, but it just seems to be the case this year. They fired their strength conditioning coach, Larry Jackson, who had been with someone for so many years, dating back to Houston. And all of a sudden this year, they decided they need to go out and get Mark Hockey from Florida State saying, we need to improve our strength program. It isn't what it needs to be, and that's kind of why we falter late in the season. Now, if that's true or not, I don't really know because, like I said, it's hard for me to believe after 5 years he says, all right, now our strength guy isn't working. It is what it is. And then when you hear someone talk about the kind of kids they're still trying to recruit into the SEC to be able to play in that style of football, because it's vastly different than what's played in the high schools in Texas and, what was played in the Big 12. So I think you're really seeing a lot of that, is that you're still seeing a university trying to figure out how they fit into the SEC and how they adapt. And you've seen the rest of the conference adapt to the A&M style of play over time. Nick Saban's really done a good job of that over time. The offense has gotten quicker, and, his linebackers have gotten slimmer. I think as Andy Staples wrote last year. And so it's interesting to see what happens with A&M this year. Regardless, I don't see them being more than a 7-win team at best. I think I'll probably have them going 6-6 because It's just really hard to even in the SEC to sustain an 8-win team year in, year out, especially for a place like A&M. And, I think that'll create a lot of questions about Kevin Sumlin and what A&M will do in 2018.
Texas is a football crazed state, much like Alabama. But, from the outside looking in, the perception over the last few years has been that Texas A&M has had the upper hand over Texas, even though those two programs have not met on the field. Now that Herman is at Texas, has that started to shift at all, or do we have to wait how this plays out a little bit?
No, I think you have to wait how it plays out. I'm very interested to see how Tom Herman does. There's a lot of things about that Houston job that it's going to take him a while to realize in Austin that this isn't Houston. When it comes to the scrutiny you're going to receive day in, day out, the media attention is going to be far more superior there than it will be anywhere else in the state. I mean, the Texas beat is the most rigorous beat, compared to all of them. There's going to be, and you're going to need that pressure to win now. And I don't know if Tom's going to be able to do that. Charlie Strong left him a really good crop of young kids, and so we'll see if they'll be able to get it done. But right now, it's just going to have to come down to him winning on the field. And with the Big 12 the way it is, there's never really been an excuse for Texas being bad. There's never an excuse for Texas being bad. They should be able to go in and recruit who they want, and they should be able to compete, at the highest level on a regular basis. And A&M has been striving to get to that point over the last few years. A&M's been the premier team between the two. That's not a question, considering Texas, how bad Texas has been. But if Texas starts going, all it takes is a couple wins, and you're going to see them becoming another team that's difficult to recruit with. And you got to remember, it's not like how it was here 10, 15 years ago, or even 5 years ago. The amount of out-of-state schools that can come into Texas and recruit really well are at an all-time high. So it's no longer A&M and Texas just getting to pick who they want. They're having to fight off your Alabamas, your Ohio States, Oklahoma's is doing as well as it's ever done in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And that's becoming the bigger problem, is that as the games become more of a national game, not just a regional game, and as Twitter's really made it easy for coaches to get in contact with guys they normally would have to go through a high school coach for. You're seeing out-of-states recruit really well, so it's imperative that, for Texas and Texas A&M each to get back to where they want to get, they've really got to lock down the state, and they've got to show, hey, you can win and you can do what you want to do here. I know every coach says they got to lock down the borders of their said states, and it's one of the oldest cliches you'll hear in recruiting. But I think it's imperative here, considering how much elite talent is left, especially in that 2016 recruiting class.
Wrapping up here with Ben Baby, who covers college athletics for the Dallas Morning News. You can follow him on Twitter at Ben_Baby. Going back to something you said earlier, let's say it plays out kind of like how you think, and Texas A&M goes 6-6 or 7-6. Is that good enough for Kevin Sumlin to keep his job?
No, I don't think so. I think anything, I think if you don't hit at least 8 like he's had the last few years, I think he's going to end up going. It just seems, after last year, there was a lot of pressure on him. After what happened against LSU and then against Kansas State, a lot of people were just continually unhappy with him. And the thing is if they do end up running out someone, say what you want about him, he has been one of the more successful coaches A&M's had in quite some time. And you got to remember, this was a team that was struggling in the Big 12 under Mike Sherman, and then everyone thought they were going to be awful, when they went to the SEC, and they've actually managed to make the transition decently well. And the problem is that they'll, like you said, they'll get to a certain point of the year where everyone's saying, is this team one of the top 10 teams in the country, and it just doesn't pan out for whatever reason. And I think that's really infuriated people more than anything else. Well, when all's said and done, if this is someone's last year, when you look back at it, this is actually going to be one of the more successful runs that they've had in quite some time. When you look at how many weeks they've been in the AP poll, how many weeks that they've just really been good and competitive week in, week out for the most part. But at the end of the day, when you're in the SEC, that's not what matters. What matters is being able to compete for not only conference championships, but have a shot now at the college football playoff. And so, it's just, I don't see 6-6 being enough for Kevin. And to be honest, if he hits 8, I think that'd be really impressive, because I think this is going to be his toughest task in the time he's been at A&M.